The stagecoach wheels hit a deep rut in the road, and Hannah Jenkins felt her stomach lurch as violently as the coach itself, sending her carpetbag tumbling from the seat beside her onto the dusty floor. She pressed one gloved hand against the window frame to steady herself, watching the endless expanse of Oregon Territory roll past in waves of golden grassland and distant purple mountains. Everything she owned in this world was packed into that single carpetbag, and she was riding toward a future as uncertain as the temperamental weather of this wild country in the summer of 1878. "You all right there, miss?" The older woman sitting across from her asked, her weathered face creasing with concern beneath her bonnet. "Yes, thank you," Hannah replied, forcing a smile as she retrieved her bag. The truth was far more complicated. She was 22 years old, nearly penniless, and heading to Pendleton with little more than hope and the address of a distant cousin who had promised her work as a seamstress. Her father had died 2 years ago, her mother just 6 months past, leaving Hannah alone in a world that had little patience for unmarried women without family or fortune. The stagecoach lurched again, and through the window, Hannah caught sight of something that made her breath catch. A rider on a magnificent bay horse was keeping pace with the coach, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. Even from this distance, she could see the easy confidence in how he sat his saddle, as if he and the horse were one creature rather than two. He glanced toward the coach, and for a moment their eyes met. His were the color of whiskey held up to lamplight, warm and questioning. Then he tipped his hat and spurred his horse forward, disappearing in a cloud of dust down the road ahead. "That's Thomas Vaughn," the older woman said, having noticed Hannah's interest. "Owns the Triple V Ranch north of town. Decent man from what I hear. Lost his father last winter. Been running that spread all alone since then." "Oh," Hannah said softly, turning her attention back to the passing landscape, willing herself not to think about the man on the bay horse or the way her heart had skipped when their eyes met. She had no business entertaining such thoughts. She was nobody, nothing special. A woman with empty pockets and no prospects beyond mending other people's clothes. The stagecoach pulled into Pendleton as the sun was beginning its descent toward the Blue Mountains. The town was larger than Hannah had expected, with a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church steeple rising against the sky, and the constant movement of horses, wagons, and people going about their business. The air smelled of dust, horses, and the promise of rain that the dark clouds on the horizon threatened to deliver. Hannah climbed down from the coach with the help of the driver, her legs unsteady after the long journey from Portland. She stood on the wooden sidewalk, clutching her carpetbag, and pulled out the worn piece of paper with her cousin's address. Maple Street. She had no idea where that was. "Can I help you find something, miss?" A voice said behind her, and Hannah turned to find herself face to face with the rider from before. Up close, Thomas Vaughn was even more striking than she had realized. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his work shirt, sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days outdoors, and those remarkable eyes that seemed to see right through her careful composure to the frightened girl beneath. "I'm looking for Maple Street," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. "My cousin lives there, Mrs. Margaret Porter." Something flickered across his face. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but Mrs. Porter passed away 3 weeks ago. Fever took her quick." The world seemed to tilt beneath Hannah's feet. "No, no, that cannot be. She wrote to me. She said she had work for me that I could stay with her." "When did you last hear from her?" Thomas asked gently. 2 months ago." Hannah's voice came out as barely a whisper. Margaret had been her last hope, her only connection in this vast territory. Without her, Hannah had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. You have other family here. Friends? Thomas was watching her with concern now, and Hannah realized she must look as stricken as she felt. She shook her head, unable to trust her voice. The street around her suddenly felt too bright, too loud. She had spent almost all her remaining money on the stagecoach ticket. She had perhaps $3 left to her name, enough for a night or two at a boarding house if she could find one cheap enough. But then what, miss? Are you going to faint? Thomas stepped closer, his hand hovering near her elbow. You have gone very pale. I will be fine, Hannah lied, straightening her spine. She had survived her father's death, her mother's passing, the sale of their small house to pay debts. She would survive this too. Could you direct me to a respectable boarding house, something affordable? Thomas was quiet for a moment, studying her with those penetrating eyes. Miss, I do not mean to be forward, but you look like you have had a terrible shock. There is a restaurant just down the street. Would you allow me to buy you supper? You can sit down, have a proper meal, and figure out your next steps. Hannah knew she should refuse. It was improper to accept such an invitation from a stranger, even in this rough country where some of the old rules seemed to bend. But she was hungry, exhausted, and frightened, and the kindness in his offer nearly undid her. I should not, she said, even as her stomach growled audibly. I insist, Thomas said, and there was something in his tone that was both gentle and firm. I cannot in good conscience leave you standing here looking lost. Besides, you look like you could use a friend right now, and I promise I am a safe one to have. Against her better judgment, Hannah nodded. Thomas picked up her carpetbag before she could protest, and led her down the wooden sidewalk to a restaurant with a sign that read Morrison's Eatery. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of fresh bread and roasting meat. Thomas guided her to a table near the window and set her bag down beside her chair. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes came over to take their order. Thomas Vaughn, I have not seen you in town in weeks. Are you actually taking a break from that ranch of yours? Hello, Mrs. Morrison, Thomas said with a genuine smile. I had business at the land office. This is Miss Hannah Jenkins. She just arrived in town. Welcome to Pendleton, dear, Mrs. Morrison said warmly. What can I get you both? They ordered, and after Mrs. Morrison left, Thomas leaned back in his chair and looked at Hannah with that direct gaze of his. So, Miss Jenkins, tell me your situation. Maybe I can help. There was something about him that made Hannah want to trust him, though she knew that was dangerous. Men in her experience had proven to be either ineffectual like her father, who had been kind but hopeless with money, or opportunistic like the creditors who had circled after his death. Yet Thomas Vaughn seemed different somehow. Solid, present in a way that made her feel less alone. So she told him. About her parents' deaths, about Margaret's letter offering work and housing, about spending nearly everything she had to get here only to find that last hope snatched away. She kept her voice level, refusing to cry, but her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. Thomas listened without interrupting, his expression growing more thoughtful as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I might have a solution, he said finally, though I will understand if you refuse. My father died last December, and I have been running the Triple V alone since then. It is a big spread, one of the largest in the area, and I have a foreman and ranch hands who help with the cattle and horses. But the house has been neglected. My father's housekeeper left a month before he died to care for her own sick mother, and I have been batching it since then. The place is a disaster, if I am being honest. I can cook enough to keep myself alive, but that is about the extent of my domestic skills. Hannah's heart began to beat faster. What are you suggesting, Mr. Vaughn? I am suggesting I hire you as my housekeeper. You would have your own room, of course, completely separate from mine. The pay would be fair and you would have room and board included. It is hard work, I will not lie about that, but it would give you a place to stay and time to figure out what you want to do next. It was improper, Hannah knew. An unmarried woman living in the house of an unmarried man, even as his employee. People would talk, but what choice did she have? Sleep on the street, try to find work in town with no references and no connections. Would there be anyone else in the house? She asked. Other servants? No, Thomas admitted. Like I said, it has just been me. But my foreman, Jack, and his wife, Rosa, live in a cabin about 100 yards from the main house. Rosa could serve as a chaperone of sorts, and she comes up to the house most days anyway. She has been trying to keep the worst of the mess under control, but she has her own house and 3 children to care for. Mrs. Morrison arrived with their food, and Hannah was grateful for the interruption. Her mind was racing. It was irregular, certainly, but not entirely scandalous if there were other people on the property, and she desperately needed work. "Why would you help me?" she asked after Mrs. Morrison left. "You do not know me." Thomas cut into his steak, considering his answer. "My mother died when I was 12. My father raised me the best he could, but he was lost without her. He taught me that when you see someone in trouble and you have the means to help, you do it. You are in trouble, Miss Jenkins, and I have a house that needs a housekeeper. It seems like a situation where we could help each other." Hannah looked down at her plate, at the food she had not yet touched. "I am not anyone special, Mr. Vaughn. I have no particular skills beyond basic sewing and cooking. I cannot promise to be the best housekeeper you have ever had." "I am not looking for the best housekeeper," Thomas said, his voice gentle but firm. "I am looking for someone who needs work and is willing to try. Besides, you are wrong about not being special." She looked up at him, startled. "I assure you I am nothing special. I am just a woman with no family and no prospects, trying to survive." "You are wrong," Thomas repeated, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You have traveled across the territory alone, faced the death of your last relative here with composure, and you are sitting here trying to figure out your next move instead of falling apart. That tells me you are stronger than you think. And from where I am sitting, that makes you plenty special." Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, with such certainty and conviction. She did not know what to say. "Think about my offer," Thomas continued. "You could come out to the ranch tomorrow morning, see the place, meet Rosa and Jack. If you decide it is not for you, I will help you find something else. But at least give yourself options." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "Maybe because the first time I saw you looking out that stagecoach window, you had the saddest eyes I have ever seen. And I thought to myself, that woman has been through something hard, and she is still here, still fighting. That deserves kindness." Something in Hannah's chest loosened at his words. She picked up her fork and began to eat, and they fell into easier conversation. Thomas told her about the ranch, about growing up in Oregon Territory, about the hard winter that had taken his father. Hannah found herself relaxing in his presence, laughing at his stories about stubborn cattle and ornery horses. By the time they finished eating, night had fallen completely. Thomas walked her to a boarding house run by a respectable widow and insisted on paying for her room for the next 3 nights. "That is too much," Hannah protested. "It gives you time to think about my offer without pressure," Thomas said. "And if you decide not to take it, it gives you a few days to find something else. Either way, you need a safe place to sleep." Hannah wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up with her. "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. You have been incredibly kind. Call me Thomas, please." and I will pick you up tomorrow morning at 8 if you want to see the ranch. Just tell Mrs. Henderson at the front desk if you decide not to come, and I will not bother you again." He tipped his hat and left, and Hannah climbed the stairs to her small but clean room. She lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the town outside her window, and thought about Thomas Vaughn and his unexpected offer. It was too good to be true, surely. Men did not help strange women out of simple kindness, yet something in her gut told her Thomas was genuine. She had seen it in his eyes, heard it in his voice. He was not trying to take advantage of her. He truly did need a housekeeper, and he truly was willing to give her a chance. Hannah made her decision before she fell asleep. Tomorrow she would see his ranch, and if it seemed safe and respectable, she would take the job. She had nowhere else to go, and Thomas Vaughn had offered her more than just employment. He had offered her hope. True to his word, Thomas arrived at precisely 8 the next morning driving a wagon. Hannah was waiting on the porch, her carpetbag packed and ready. She had dressed in her most practical dress, a simple brown calico that had seen better days but was clean and mended. "Good morning, Miss Jenkins," Thomas said, climbing down to help her into the wagon. "I am glad you decided to come see the place." "Thank you for the opportunity," Hannah replied. The ride to the Triple V took about 40 minutes, following a road that wound through rolling hills covered in tall grass that whispered in the morning breeze. The sky was a perfect blue, and the air smelled of sage and earth. Despite her nervousness, Hannah found herself relaxing slightly as they rode. "What made you decide to take over the ranch?" she asked. "Did you always want to be a rancher?" Thomas glanced at her, then back at the road. "I left for a few years, actually. Went to San Francisco when I was 20, thought I wanted to see something beyond these hills. Worked in a bank, wore a suit every day, lived in a boarding house that smelled like boiled cabbage. Hated every minute of it." Hannah could not help but smile at the image. "You do not seem like a bank worker." "I am not," Thomas agreed with a grin. "I realized pretty quick that I missed this land, missed the work, the animals, the space to breathe. My father got sick and I came home to help. He recovered that time, but I never went back to San Francisco. This is where I belong." There was something in his voice when he spoke about the land, a reverence that Hannah found touching. Thomas Vaughn was a man who knew himself, knew what he wanted. She envied that certainty. The ranch appeared over a rise, and Hannah caught her breath. The main house was a sprawling structure of wood and stone, 2 stories tall with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. It needed paint. She could see that immediately, and some of the porch boards looked worn, but the bones of it were good. Behind the house stood a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and a series of corrals where horses moved like living poetry against the fence rails. "It is beautiful," Hannah said softly. "It is home," Thomas replied. "Though I will warn you, the inside is not as pretty as the outside right now." He was not exaggerating. When Thomas led her through the front door, Hannah had to suppress a gasp. The entry hall was covered in a layer of dust, and beyond it, she could see a parlor with papers scattered across every surface, a dining room with a table that looked like it had not been properly cleaned in months, and through a doorway, a kitchen that made her fingers itch to start scrubbing. "I told you it was bad," Thomas said, sounding almost apologetic. "I've been focused on keeping the ranch running. The house has been low priority." "It just needs attention," Hannah said, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done, "and perhaps some organization." A knock at the door made them both turn. A Mexican woman in her 30s stood there, smiling warmly. "Thomas, I saw the wagon. Is this the lady you mentioned?" "Rosa, this is Miss Hannah Jenkins." "Hannah, this is Rosa Martinez. She and her husband Jack are the backbone of this operation." Rosa came forward and took Hannah's hands in hers. "It is so good to meet you. Thomas said you might come be our housekeeper. Please say yes. This house is crying out for a woman's touch." Hannah found herself warming to Rosa immediately. "I am considering it." "Let me show you around properly," Rosa said. "Thomas, you go check on that fence in the south pasture like you have been meaning to do. I will take care of Hannah." Thomas looked like he might argue, then nodded. "I will be back in an hour or so. Rosa, show her everything, including the problems. I want Miss Jenkins to make an informed decision." After he left, Rosa led Hannah through the house. There were 8 rooms total: a parlor, dining room, kitchen, study, and 4 bedrooms upstairs. Thomas's room was easy to identify by the clothes draped over a chair and the unmade bed. The other 3 bedrooms were empty and dusty, including the one Rosa said would be Hannah's if she took the job. "The house is sound," Rosa explained as they toured. "Thomas's father built it well. It just needs care. Cleaning, organization, some mending and repairs." "Thomas is good man, Miss Hannah. He works hard, treats everyone fair. He pays on time, never raises his voice in anger. You would be safe here." Hannah appreciated Rosa's directness. What about the impropriety of an unmarried woman working for an unmarried man? Rosa smiled. "Some will talk, yes. But Thomas is respected here. His father was respected, and you would not be alone. I am here during the days and my cabin is close. My husband Jack, he watches out for everyone on this property. If Thomas ever did anything dishonorable, which he would not, Jack would have words." "What happened to Thomas's mother?" Hannah asked as they descended the stairs back to the main floor. Rosa's expression grew sad. "Sickness took her when Thomas was boy. His father never remarried. I think he loved her too much to imagine replacing her. He died of broken heart as much as from the pneumonia, I think. 12 years he lasted after she died, but part of him died with her." Hannah thought about that as Rosa showed her the kitchen. It was large and well-equipped with a cast-iron stove, a good-sized pantry, and windows that let in morning light. Under the mess, she could see it was a wonderful space to work in. "The job is yours if you want it," Rosa said gently. "I can see you already planning how to fix things. That is good. This house needs someone who cares." Hannah walked to the window and looked out at the land stretching toward the mountains. She thought about her options: stay in town with no prospects and dwindling money, or take this job in this beautiful place with a man who seemed decent and a woman who was offering friendship. "I will take it," she said, turning to Rosa. "If Mr. Vaughn's offer is still open, I will be his housekeeper." Rosa's face broke into a wide smile. "Good. This is very good. Come, let me help you start. We can at least get your room cleaned and ready before Thomas returns." They spent the next hour working together, and Hannah felt some of her anxiety ease. Rosa was easy to talk to, sharing stories about her 3 children and her husband Jack, asking gentle questions about Hannah's life. By the time Thomas returned, Hannah's bedroom was clean, her few belongings unpacked, and she was wearing an apron over her dress, already planning her attack on the kitchen. Thomas found them in the parlor, where Hannah was sorting through the scattered papers. He stopped in the doorway, and something in his expression made Hannah's heart skip. "You are staying?" he asked. "If the offer is still good," Hannah replied. "I warn you, this house is going to be in upheaval for the next few days while I organize." "The offer is more than good," Thomas said, and the relief in his voice was evident. "And upheaval is fine. The house cannot get worse than it already is." "Do not challenge me, Mr. Vaughn," Hannah said with a small smile. "It can always get worse before it gets better." Thomas laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. "In that case, I will stay out of your way. My room and the study are yours to organize as you see fit. I will warn you, my filing system is non-existent." "I noticed," Hannah said dryly, gesturing to the papers she had already found in 3 different rooms. Rosa left to return to her own family, and Hannah set to work with a determination that surprised her. She had not felt this sense of purpose in months, not since her mother had died and Hannah's life had become about survival rather than living. Here, in this house that needed her, she could do something useful. Thomas tried to help at first, but Hannah shooed him away after he put dishes in the wrong cabinet for the 3rd time. "You are making more work for me," she said, not unkindly. "Go do whatever ranchers do. I will call you when supper is ready." He went, but Hannah caught him looking back at her with an expression she could not quite read. The first week passed in a blur of activity. Hannah cleaned and organized with a single-minded focus that left her exhausted by nightfall but strangely satisfied. She found a rhythm in the work, starting each day with breakfast for Thomas, spending the morning on heavy cleaning, the afternoon on laundry or mending, and the evening preparing supper. Thomas was an ideal employer. He stayed out of her way during the day, working on the ranch with Jack and the other hands, but he made a point of eating meals with her, insisting she sit at the table rather than serve him and eat separately. Their conversations during these meals became the highlight of Hannah's days. She learned that Thomas had a quick wit and a thoughtful mind. He asked her opinions on everything from politics to the best way to organize the pantry, and he actually listened to her answers. He told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about his mother whose laugh he still remembered, about his father who had been stern but loving. In turn, Hannah found herself sharing things she had not spoken of in years: her father's gentleness and impracticality, her mother's strength in the face of poverty, her own dreams of having a home and family someday. "Why did you never marry?" Thomas asked one evening over supper. They had been living under the same roof for nearly 2 weeks, and the question no longer seemed too personal. Hannah considered her answer carefully. "No one ever asked. My father had no money for a dowry, and I am not the sort of woman who turns heads. I am too plain, too serious. Men want someone pretty and vivacious." Thomas set down his fork and looked at her with such intensity that she felt color rise in her cheeks. "You are not plain, Mr. Vaughn, Thomas," he corrected. "We have been living in the same house for 2 weeks. I think we can use first names." "Thomas," Hannah amended. "I am not fishing for compliments. I know what I am." "Do you?" He leaned back in his chair. "Because from where I sit, you are one of the strongest women I have ever met. You came to a strange place with nothing, found out your only connection was dead, and instead of falling apart, you started building a new life. You have transformed this house in 2 weeks. My foreman's wife said yesterday that it is good to see the Triple V looking like a home again. That is because of you." Hannah felt something warm unfurl in her chest, but she pushed it down. She could not afford to read too much into kind words. Thomas was her employer, nothing more. "Thank you. That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness, it is truth." Thomas picked up his fork again, but his eyes remained on her. "You sell yourself short, Hannah. You always have, I think." The conversation moved to other topics, but Hannah thought about his words late that night as she lay in bed. Could he be right? Had she spent so long thinking of herself as nothing special that she had made it true? As spring turned toward summer, Hannah settled fully into life at the Triple V Ranch. She developed a routine and took pride in maintaining the house. The rooms now gleamed with polish, the windows sparkled, and the whole place smelled of fresh bread and beeswax rather than dust and neglect. Rosa became a true friend, often bringing her children up to the main house to visit while Hannah baked. And Thomas. Thomas became something Hannah could not quite define. He was her employer, yes, but also her friend. Their evening conversations grew longer, stretching past supper into the twilight hours as they sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. They talked about everything and nothing. Books they had read, places they wanted to see, memories both sweet and painful. Hannah found herself watching for him during the day, listening for the sound of his boots on the porch when he came in for lunch. She noticed things about him. The way he always hung his hat on the same peg by the door, how he rubbed the back of his neck when he was tired, the rare but devastating smile that transformed his whole face. She was falling in love with him. She realized one morning while kneading bread dough. The knowledge came so suddenly and certainly that she had to sit down, her flour-covered hands pressed against the table. She loved Thomas Vaughn, loved his kindness and his strength, his quiet humor and his thoughtfulness, loved the way he treated her as an equal rather than a servant, loved how safe she felt in his presence. It was foolish. He was a wealthy rancher, the owner of one of the largest spreads in the region. She was his housekeeper, a woman with no family and no prospects. He had saved her out of kindness, nothing more. The fact that he was friendly and respectful did not mean he saw her as anything other than an employee. Hannah resolved to keep her feelings to herself. She had a good situation here, better than anything she could have hoped for when she had arrived in Pendleton. She would not risk it by revealing emotions that Thomas almost certainly did not return. But hiding her feelings became harder as the weeks passed, especially when Thomas started doing small things that made her heart race. Bringing her wildflowers he had found on the range, staying to help her with dishes after supper, despite her protests, teaching her to ride so she could accompany him on short trips around the ranch. The riding lessons were the worst, or perhaps the best, depending on how Hannah looked at it. Thomas was patient as he taught her, his hands steady on her waist as he helped her mount, his voice calm as he instructed her on holding the reins. Hannah tried to focus on learning, but all she could think about was his proximity, the warmth of his hands, the way he smelled of leather and sage and something uniquely him. "You are a natural," Thomas said one afternoon after she had successfully trotted around the corral. His smile was proud, and something in his eyes made Hannah's breath catch. "Next week we will go for a real ride out to the creek." "I would like that," Hannah managed to say, though her heart was pounding. That night, as Hannah was finishing the dishes, Thomas came into the kitchen and leaned against the doorframe, watching her. She was used to his presence now, but tonight there was something different in the air, a tension she could not name. "Hannah, can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Of course." She dried her hands on her apron and turned to face him. Thomas seemed to be struggling for words, which was unusual for him. "Do you ever think about the future, about what you want for yourself?" "Sometimes," Hannah admitted. "Why do you ask?" "I have been thinking about my future lately, about what I want the Triple V to become, about the life I want to build here." He paused, his eyes intense on hers. "And I realize that every time I think about the future, you are in it." Hannah's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Thomas, let me finish," he said gently. "I know this is probably inappropriate. You work for me and I should not be saying these things. But I cannot keep pretending that what I feel for you is just respect for a good employee. It is more than that, Hannah, so much more." She could not breathe, could not think. "What are you saying?" Thomas crossed the kitchen to stand in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you. I do not know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was that first day when you looked out of the stagecoach with those sad eyes. Maybe it was watching you transform this house. Maybe it was one of the 100 conversations we have had over supper. But it happened, and I cannot pretend otherwise anymore." I am nothing special, Hannah whispered, her voice shaking. I am just a housekeeper. You could have anyone, any woman you wanted. Thomas reached up and gently cupped her cheek with his hand. You are everything special to me. You are strong and kind and smart and beautiful. You make me laugh. You challenge me. You turned my house into a home. When I come in at the end of a long day, I look forward to seeing you more than anything else in the world. How is that nothing special? Tears pricked at Hannah's eyes. You truly mean that. Every word, Thomas said solemnly. I love you, Hannah Jenkins. I'm not asking for an answer right now. I know this is sudden and your position here makes things complicated, but I needed you to know. I needed you to understand that you are seen, you are valued, and you are loved. Something broke open inside Hannah, some wall she had built around her heart. Thomas, I love you too. I have for weeks now, but I was afraid to say anything. I thought you would never see me as anything but your employee. Thomas made a sound that was half laugh, half sigh, and pulled her into his arms. Hannah wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his chest, hearing the rapid beating of his heart that matched her own. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the warm kitchen while the last light of day faded outside the windows. Finally, Thomas pulled back just enough to look down at her. Can I kiss you? Hannah nodded, unable to speak, and Thomas lowered his head to press his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but then Hannah rose up on her toes and kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside, and Thomas gathered her closer with a sound of pure joy. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. Marry me. Hannah laughed, the sound bright with happiness and disbelief. You just told me you loved me 5 minutes ago, I know, but I have never been more certain of anything. Marry me, Hannah. Make this your home for real. Build a life with me here. Yes, Hannah said, the word coming out fierce and sure. Yes, I will marry you. Thomas kissed her again and again and again until they were both laughing breathlessly. I should let you get back to work, he said, but he made no move to release her. The work can wait, Hannah replied and kissed him once more. They were married 3 weeks later in Pendleton's small church, with Rosa and Jack standing witness and half the town in attendance. Hannah wore a dress that Rosa and several other ranch wives had helped her sew, a simple but elegant design in pale blue that made her eyes shine. Thomas wore his best suit and looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. You are beautiful, he whispered as they stood at the altar. You are biased, Hannah whispered back, but she was smiling. Guilty, Thomas agreed. And then the preacher was asking them to speak their vows, and Hannah felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks as she promised to love and honor this man who had saved her, who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. When Thomas kissed her as man and wife, the church erupted in applause and cheers. Hannah laughed against his mouth, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. She had come to Oregon territory with nothing, expecting nothing, and had found everything she never knew she wanted. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed everyone in the county. Hannah danced with Thomas in the fading light, surrounded by people who had become her friends and neighbors, and thought about how strange life was. 6 months ago, she had been alone and frightened, certain her best days were behind her. Now she was married to a man she loved beyond measure, surrounded by community, with a future stretching bright before her. What are you thinking about? Thomas asked as they swayed to the music. How lucky I am, Hannah said honestly, how none of this seems real. It is real, Thomas assured her. You are my wife, this is your home, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how special you are to me. I am beginning to believe it, Hannah admitted. You are teaching me to see myself the way you see me. Good, Thomas said and pulled her closer. That night, after all the guests had left and Rosa had shooed them toward the house with knowing smiles, Thomas carried Hannah over the threshold of their home. Their home now, not just his. Hannah had never felt more cherished. The months that followed were the happiest of Hannah's life. She threw herself into being not just a housekeeper, but a true partner in running the ranch. She learned the business side from Thomas, sitting with him in the evenings as he went over accounts and discussed plans for expanding the herd. She developed relationships with the neighboring ranchers' wives, hosting gatherings at the Triple V and attending quilting bees in town. She even learned to ride well enough to occasionally accompany Thomas when he checked on distant parts of the property. But more than anything, she reveled in being loved by Thomas Vaughn. He was an attentive husband, always making sure she knew she was valued. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions, took her suggestions seriously, and never once made her feel like anything less than his equal partner. Their first anniversary came quickly, marked by a quiet dinner on the porch as they watched the sun set. "I have something for you," Thomas said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a delicate gold locket. Hannah opened it to find two tiny photographs, one of Thomas's parents, the other empty. "That one is for our children," Thomas explained, "when we have them. I know we have talked about starting a family, and I wanted you to know that I am ready whenever you are." Hannah smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness, and kissed him softly. "I think I might already be pregnant." Thomas's eyes went wide. "What, really? Are you sure?" "Fairly certain," Hannah admitted. "I was going to wait a few more weeks before saying anything, but since you gave me this lovely gift." Thomas let out a whoop of joy and gathered her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and begging him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby. Hannah, we are going to have a baby." "I am glad you are happy," Hannah said, still laughing as he finally set her down but kept his arms around her. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Thomas said, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "I love you so much, both of you." Their son was born the following spring, a healthy boy with Thomas's eyes and Hannah's stubborn chin. They named him James, after Thomas's father. And Hannah had never known love could be so fierce or so consuming as what she felt when she held her baby for the first time. Thomas was a devoted father, rising with her for midnight feedings, walking the floor with James when he was fussy, and insisting that Hannah rest while he took their son for long walks around the property. "I want to show him everything," Thomas explained. "I want him to love this land the way I do." "He will," Hannah assured him. "How could he not, with you as his father?" Life settled into a new rhythm, one that included the demands of parenthood alongside the work of the ranch. Hannah managed it all with a competence that surprised her. She had once thought of herself as nothing special, as just a woman trying to survive. But here, in this life she had built with Thomas, she discovered she was capable of so much more than survival. She was capable of thriving. 2 years after James was born, Hannah gave birth to their daughter, Emily. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's quiet determination. Thomas was just as devoted to her as he had been to James, holding her for hours and singing lullabies in a voice that was slightly off-key but filled with love. "Our family is complete," Thomas said one night as they stood together in the nursery, watching their children sleep. "It is perfect," Hannah agreed, leaning into his side. Thomas wrapped his arm around her waist. "Do you remember that first day, when you got off the stagecoach looking so lost?" "I was terrified," Hannah admitted. "I thought my life was over." "And now?" Thomas asked softly. Hannah looked at her children, at her husband, at the home they had built together. "Now I know it was just beginning. Everything I thought was an ending was actually the start of the best part of my story. Our story," Thomas corrected and kissed the top of her head. This is our story, and I am grateful for every chapter. As the years passed, the Triple V prospered under their joint stewardship. Thomas expanded the herd and improved the breeding stock, while Hannah developed a side business selling baked goods in town that brought in extra income and made her feel useful in a way beyond just domestic duties. James grew into a serious boy who loved following his father around the ranch, while Emily was more adventurous, always getting into mischief that made Hannah laugh even as she scolded. Their life was not without challenges. There were hard winters when they worried about the cattle, dry summers when the creek ran low, and the constant demands of running a large operation. But they faced every challenge together, and Hannah learned that partnership was the greatest gift of marriage. She also learned that Thomas had been right all along. She was special, not because of anything she did or any talent she possessed, but because she was loved. Thomas made her feel special every day through 1,000 small actions. The way he brought her coffee in the morning, how he always kissed her goodbye before leaving for work, the pride in his eyes when she accomplished something new, the way he reached for her hand whenever they walked together. On their 10th anniversary, they threw a large party at the ranch. The house was full of friends and neighbors, including Rosa and Jack, who had become like family over the years. Hannah stood on the porch as the sun began to set, watching Thomas swing Emily around while James rode on his back, and felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. "You look happy," Rosa said, coming to stand beside her. "I am," Hannah replied. "I really am." "I remember when you first came here," Rosa said with a smile. "So scared, so certain you were nothing, and now look at you. You are the heart of this ranch. Everyone loves you." "I was so wrong about myself," Hannah admitted. "I spent so much time thinking I had to be exceptional to matter. I did not understand that just being myself was enough." "Thomas saw it right away," Rosa pointed out. "That is why he could not let you go." Hannah watched her husband playing with their children, and her heart felt full to bursting. "He saved me, Rosa, in every way a person can be saved." "And you saved him," Rosa countered. "This house was so sad after his father died. Thomas was going through the motions, but there was no joy here. You brought that back. You gave him a reason to build something instead of just maintaining what his father left." Thomas looked up then and caught Hannah's eye. His face broke into a smile, and he mouthed, "I love you," across the yard. Hannah felt herself smiling back, the words "I love you too" forming on her lips. Later that night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Hannah and Thomas sat together on the porch swing, her head on his shoulder and his arm around her waist. The stars were brilliant above them, and the air was soft with the promise of summer. "Do you ever think about that day you hired me?" Hannah asked. "All the time," Thomas admitted. "I think about how close I came to never meeting you. If you had arrived a week earlier, before your cousin died, you would have gone to her house and I would have never known you existed. The timing had to be exact for our paths to cross. Fate," Hannah murmured, "or luck, or providence. Whatever you want to call it, I am grateful." Thomas pressed a kiss to her hair. "You have given me everything I ever wanted but did not know how to ask for: a real home, children, someone to share my life with who understands me and challenges me and loves me anyway." "I am the lucky one," Hannah insisted. "You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else, including myself." "You were never invisible," Thomas said firmly. "You were always remarkable. You just needed someone to point it out." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently beneath them. Hannah thought about the girl she had been 10 years ago, stepping off that stagecoach with nothing but fear and a carpetbag. She would have never believed her life could turn out like this, that she could find love, family, purpose, that she could transform from someone who saw herself as nothing special into a woman who knew her own worth. "Thomas," she said softly. Thank you." He pulled back to look at her, confused. For what? For insisting I was special when I could not see it, for loving me into believing it, for being patient while I learned to love myself. Thomas's expression grew tender, and he cupped her face in his hands. "Hannah, you have always been special. I just helped you see what was already true. The strength, the kindness, the determination, all of that was yours from the beginning. I was just lucky enough to be the one who got to witness you discovering it." Hannah kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. When they finally pulled apart, she settled back against his shoulder with a contented sigh. "I want to grow old here with you," she said. "On this porch, watching our children grow up and have children of their own. I want a lifetime of moments just like this." "You will have it," Thomas promised. "We are going to have 50 more anniversaries at least, maybe 60 if we are both stubborn enough." Hannah laughed. "I think we are both stubborn enough." "Definitely," Thomas agreed, and they fell back into peaceful silence. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life neither had imagined possible. As the years continued to pass, Hannah and Thomas's love only deepened. They weathered every storm together. Economic downturns that threatened the ranch's finances, illness that struck their children but mercifully passed, the changing times as Oregon grew from territory to established state. Through it all, they remained partners in every sense of the word. James grew into a young man who shared his father's love of ranching and took over more responsibilities as Thomas grew older. Emily surprised everyone by developing a talent for horse training, and under her management, the Triple V became known throughout the region for producing some of the finest horses in Oregon. On their 25th anniversary, Thomas and Hannah renewed their vows in the same church where they had first married, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Hannah wore a new dress, but Thomas still looked at her the same way he had all those years ago, like she was the most beautiful and precious thing in the world. 25 years, Thomas said as they danced at the celebration afterward. "And I love you more now than I did when we started." "How is that possible?" Hannah teased. "You claimed to be completely in love with me back then." "I was," Thomas said seriously. "But love grows, Hannah. Every year with you has added layers to what I feel. You are my best friend, my partner, the mother of my children, the person I want to share every thought with. How could I not love you more as time goes on?" Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you too, more than I can express. You made me believe I was special, and then you spent 25 years proving it every single day." "You are special," Thomas said, as he had said countless times over the years. "You are everything special to me." They continued to dance, surrounded by the life they had built together, and Hannah thought about the journey that had brought her here. From that scared girl on a stage coach to this woman who was confident in her place in the world, loved and loving in return. It had all started with one act of kindness from a man who saw her worth before she could see it herself. As they grew older, Thomas and Hannah settled more into being the wise elders of the ranch, letting their children take over the day-to-day operations while they enjoyed their grandchildren and each other. They still sat on the porch every evening, still held hands when they walked, still looked at each other with eyes full of love. "You ever regret it?" Hannah asked one evening when they were in their 60s, her hair now more gray than brown, Thomas's face lined with age and sun and laughter. "Marrying your housekeeper instead of someone more suitable?" Thomas turned to look at her with such astonishment that Hannah almost laughed. "Regret it? Hannah, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You were always suitable. You were perfect." "I was nothing," Hannah reminded him, but there was no sadness in it now, just the acknowledgement of how far she had come. "You were never nothing," Thomas said fiercely, taking her hand in his. "And I will spend however many years I have left making sure you never forget that. You are special, Hannah Vaughn. You always have been. You always will be." Hannah squeezed his hand, emotion welling up in her chest. "And you are everything to me." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, the same as they had done thousands of times before. Two people who had found each other when both needed it most, and who had built a love that had lasted decades. Years later, when Hannah was 75 and Thomas 78, they sat on that same porch one golden autumn afternoon, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. The Triple V had been passed down to James now, with Emily managing a thriving horse breeding operation on the adjacent property she and her husband had purchased years ago. "Look at what we built," Thomas said softly, his hand still able to find Hannah's after all these years. "All of this started because I saw a sad-eyed woman getting off a stagecoach and knew I had to help her." "And I thought you were crazy," Hannah said with a smile. "A stranger offering me a job, being so kind for no reason. I was convinced there had to be a catch." "The only catch was that I fell in love with you almost immediately," Thomas admitted. "I think I knew even then that you were going to change my life." "We changed each other's lives," Hannah corrected. "You showed me I was worth loving. I showed you that home was not just a place, but the people you share it with." Thomas brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Best partnership I could have ever hoped for." As the sun began to set, casting everything in golden light, Hannah leaned her head on Thomas's shoulder, just as she had done countless times over the past 50-plus years. Their bodies were older now, creaking with age, but the love between them was as strong as ever. Stronger, perhaps, for having weathered so many seasons together. "Thank you," Hannah whispered. "For what?" Thomas asked, though he was smiling. They had had this conversation many times over the years. "For seeing me, for loving me, for insisting I was special until I believed it." "You are special," Thomas said, as he always did. "You are everything special to me." Hannah closed her eyes, content in a way she had never imagined possible back when she was a frightened 22-year-old with nothing but a carpetbag and fear. She had found love, built a family, created a legacy that would continue long after she and Thomas were gone. And it had all started with a man who saw her worth when she could not see it herself, who insisted she was special when she felt like nothing. "I love you, Thomas Vaughn," she said softly. "I love you, Hannah Vaughn," Thomas replied. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they sat together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love well earned. The Triple V Ranch stretched out before them, full of life and laughter and the promise of generations to come. Hannah thought back to that day so long ago when she had insisted she was nothing special, and Thomas had replied that she was everything special to him. At the time, she had not believed him, but 50 years of his constant love and devotion had taught her the truth. She was special, not because of what she did or what she achieved, but because she was loved completely and loved completely in return, and in the end, that was everything. They continued sitting there as the stars began to emerge, two people who had started as employer and employee, become friends, fallen in love, and built a life together that neither could have imagined at the start. The evening air grew cool and eventually Thomas stood, offering Hannah his hand. "Ready to go inside?" he asked. Hannah took his hand, letting him pull her gently to her feet. "Ready." They walked into their home together, hand in hand as they had done for over 50 years, as they would continue to do for whatever time they had left. Behind them, the porch swing swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the lights of their families' homes twinkled across the property. The Triple V Ranch would continue long after they were gone, but the love story of Thomas and Hannah Vaughn would live on in the memories of their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. A story of a woman who thought she was nothing and a man who showed her she was everything. A story of kindness leading to friendship, leading to love. A story with a happy ending that had lasted a lifetime. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the ranch, you could almost hear the echo of Hannah's laughter mixing with Thomas's low voice. The sound of two people who had found each other against all odds and who had loved each other with a devotion that had lasted until the very end and beyond. Their story was one of the great love stories of the West, simple, true, and profound in its demonstration that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary of moments. A stage coach arriving in town, a kind offer made to a stranger, a decision to take a chance on something uncertain. And from those small moments, a love that would echo through generations, reminding everyone who heard it that being special is not about what you have or what you have achieved, but about being seen, being valued, and being loved for exactly who you are. The legacy of Thomas and Hannah Vaughn lived on at the Triple V Ranch for generations, a testament to the power of love, kindness, and the belief that every person has worth if only someone takes the time to see it.